Hello, man. Hello, Mgtows. It's a lazy Wednesday night. Just gonna wait a second to check.
Hello, man.
There we go. We have sound. We have everything we need. Just sitting around drinking a cup of tea, and I have to put that out. That's my turd flinging monkey cup. So I have to hold it with my. I forget I have to hold it in my left hand. I sport turd flinging monkey with his cups. Wait for a few minutes for people to come in. I doubt if it's a lazy Wednesday night, and I don't know if anybody will come in, but that's okay. I suppose you all seen the title, the twin relics of barbarism. Twin relics of barbarism is Civil War, 1856. The GOP party met in Philadelphia, and they talked about the twin relics of barbarism. The twin relics of barbarism at that point was polygamy and slavery. We had a war about that, and a lot of laws came from that. And what does this have to do with Mgtow? What does this have to do with men's rights? You ask you. It has a lot to do with men's rights, and we'll go on why that has a lot to do with men's rights, because there was two things that we needed to solve. They're called the twin relics of barbarism. I say monogamy nowadays because monogamy took the place of polygamy, and in 19th century America, we experienced fierce battles against two expressions of. They're both territorial. They were territorial based. The Mormons and slavery. The Mormons were a problem at that time for the Christians, and even though we have a constitution that said at that time, well, we'll respect each other's rights to have any religion we want, that didn't go as far as in the bedroom. I often mention Trudeau's father said the government needs to get out of our bedrooms. And where did that start? Where did the governments enter the bedrooms of the people? You got to ask yourself. Well, that happened after the Civil War during the Reconstruction. Even before the Reconstruction, two things happened at that time. There was this territorial-based multiculturalism, Southern slavery, and Mormon polygamy. Both were in the South at that time, and one of them the Southern Baptists wanted to get rid of, and the Northerners were more open to freedom of religion at that time than the Southerners, and they wanted to get rid of the Mormons out of their territory. There's a few good movies out now, and there's some good stuff that you can read about. John Smith, I think it was at that time. I'm not really briefed into Mormon, but there was considerable pressure that was placed on the government at that time for both of these issues. Abolition, the slavery required a civil war. We had a war over abolition and slavery. The aftermath transformed this country, and it gave more power to the federal constitution in ways that enhanced its authority and to intervene in affairs of constituent states. The extermination of the Mormons, or what the Mormon polygamy, took a different route. It took intervention, and it took an intervention in federal government deploying an array of increasingly coercive weapons against the states and the constituent states, and even the preceding states that followed up into the 20th century. And what that is they made a bunch of laws that favored one religion over another religion. Pretty much broke our constitution. We see these things. It set precedents even into the 20th and the 21st century. These legal weapons still exist today. They have turned into the gender dynamic wars. They employed legal weapons that were quite. They intervened in the affairs of what you do in your bedroom, how how you look at marriage, how you look at monogamy and polygamy. I often say that polygamy, there's nothing wrong with polygamy, and what men see wrong is with polygamy is polyandry. They don't like it when the girls do it. We hear that all the time, but the men were told that you can't be polygamous. You can't have two wives. You can't have 3, 4, 5 wives. And that was saying that, the alpha male couldn't have all those wives, even if he could afford them. And it was seen as barbaric at that time. But today, there still exist these weapons that existed then that they put in place today, and they work their way up through the 19th and 20th century to where we're at now in 2020, and we have a gender dynamics war raging about. We had feminism, and both of these things took on the same shape because they were the same. They were the same war, the Civil War. One was took extreme violence to settle. One took on a different characteristic of. In fact. The Southerners won on that war of polygamy. They did it very diplomatically, and we settled things with the Southerners on the ideas of polygamy. And the Mormons went to Salt Lake City. They moved out of, I think it was Missouri or Kansas or wherever they were at that time. They moved out and they left, and they went to Utah. And, under serious duress from our government and under serious duress from Christians at that time, Catholics. Who else was involved in that? Lutherans and Protestants and all of the Christians. But that gave us the laws that worked up through through these times, and we look at the child support laws, and we look at what happened to slavery too. Slavery, it really didn't go away. We just traded it. We all became the slaves because of polygamy laws and because of the twin relics of barbarism, which they called them, and I still call them myself. These child support laws and how we have to be monogamous to women, and how we have to take care of them. These things are relics from the past. They're barbaric laws that are forced on you and you and you, Mgtow warrior and Stone and Riff, and we've all experienced the results of these barbaric laws that were passed that favored one religion, even though our Constitution at that time says we'll have the choice of any religion, and polygamy would fall under ethics and morals. And if that ethics and morals followed the norms of your religion, then that would be okay. But the United States government didn't let that be. They wouldn't let that be. And basically, the Southern Baptists wouldn't let that be. We had this great war. And like I said, one of the twin relics was slavery, and it was stomped out. And that had more to do with human machinery being replaced by thrashers. And McCormick was one of the, in Chicago, McCormick was one of the big factories. I don't know if you're a farm person, you'll see the big thrashers. They got the wooden thrashers on them, and the Amish still use them to this day. They're horse-drawn, and they go around and they thrash the wheat and other things. Farm plows were being built in Cleveland, and a place called Empire Plow. They were building these massive buildings that these donkeys would pull these big things, and they would run a belt up, and then they would drill holes, and then they'd bring up what was called rock maple, and the rock maple would raise up, and it would go and it would click, and then it would fall and form the metal much easier than sitting there pounding and on a farm. And human machinery was being replaced by mechanical machinery, and we went through our industrial age. But with polygamy, we really didn't go through an industrial age. It wasn't really settled, and I thought when I look back in history, I thought both the things were settled terribly. One was settled with a war, and one was settled diplomatically, and they should have been reversed, or at least both things should have been settled. Both things should have been settled over a longer period of time, and a lot of historians will. Because it really did. It took Jim Crow laws. Is Jim Crow still directing traffic? Yes, he's still directing traffic for slavery in the form of it switched. Now think about these two things. Slavery became the male willingness to volunteer for those mechanical jobs that were coming, building in factories. So if you wanted to participate in this thing, the industrial age, you had to be a Christian. You had to be a part of that society. You had to believe in what they believed in. Well, she probably wouldn't get hired. So you did, and you followed the rules of Christianity at that time. And Mormonism was exiled to Utah, and those laws still exist to those today's, or what the remnants, the relics of those laws, are still barbaric to men. Slavery still exists in our. What happens is slavery just went. All the men just share in the slavery of our society now. And how did they acquire that? How did they do that? How did they get all the men to volunteer? Well, they got it through monogamy. That was a relationship that they forced on women and forced on men to. You're going to be the protector, provider, and you're not going to screw around, and you're going to be the wife, and you're not going to screw around. And this makes it, and it binds, and it's a bundle of sticks. That's what marriage means, a bundle of sticks. And you're going to act as a team and do that. Go team. And that worked through the 50s, and it worked up to the 60s, and then things started unraveling. Feminism came around, equal rights came around. We have a civil rights movement, and these laws that we made, these traditional laws that we made, don't quite look the same. They don't have the same appeal. And it just took men a little longer, up to the 80s or the early 90s, when this men's rights movement came out. I don't want to be a slave to. I don't want to be a slave to monogamy. I'd rather be, when you think about today's society, what polygamy is just having the right to have multiple partners outside of, and do what you want, and and not have to explain your sexual tendencies to anybody. Polygamy is enforced for females now too. Females have several partners now, and partners in relationship. Females can actually introduce polygamy into the relationship. You see it in cucking, and 40% of children are born not to the paternal parent. Stuff like that. So polygamy is still not enforced on females, but monogamy in itself is forced on males. It's forced on you. And that's, I've read all the stuff on this, but and what The Economist says, and I respect economists' view that polygamy gets men excited, and especially when the thought of polyandry comes in, or female polygamy, because but when you think about it, you're already cucked by your nation. You're paying taxes to take care of those things. You're paying taxes to do that. You're already pre-cucked. You're paying for that anyways. But I often wonder, this is a topic that I always wanted to talk about, is where did this gender dynamics thing where did it start? What was the cause of it? And you can trace it back to the Civil War, and it's what we call the twin relics of barbarism. That's slavery and polygamy. But monogamy has taken its place, and that was supposed to be the cure. Monogamy was supposed to be the cure to the Mormons at that time, or the Mormon religion, and because they somehow don't have the right in this country that says in our First Amendment that you So what happens with child support? What happens with in HHS and those services? And your judge, when he looks at after divorce, because you're bound to this monogamy through these laws that came from the anti-polygamy laws in the Civil War. You're bound to this monogamy now as a male. Males are bound to this. So you read your state's constitutions under your child support laws and everything, and at the end of it, it's going to explain. You always see this that slavery is defined as one person working for another without pay, and then there'll be exception. And exception is child support, and the exception of debtor's prison is child support, and the exception of and what they're really saying is the monogamy rules that were placed on you. You were never considered as a human being in this society as a man. You were just considered as that replacement slave that took over them duties to run the machinery instead of being the machinery during the Civil War. That's what actually really happened in the Civil War. If you ever really study it and look at it, I spent a lot of time down in Battlefield National Park and around Virginia and Fort Lee, Virginia, and the museums around that point when I was younger, and I learned a lot about the battles and what had actually happened. But one of the things that we don't want to talk about. One of the things that we don't want to talk about is the war was not just about slavery. There was actually three things, and it was human machinery and the oncoming industrial revolution that was coming on, which was the biggest part. We've seen how awful the industrial revolution and socialism and Russia turned out. Millions of people died. Well, we had the same thing here. 865,000 men died so we can bring on the industrial revolution and machinery. And Russia at that time was 40 years behind us, at least. Stalin and Lenin both wanted to bring them into a new industrial age, but it was hard at that time in the 1800s. We're the 1800s, and they didn't want to do that. But we had our industrial revolution. We had our war. We said, okay, there's no longer human slavery. We're going to replace it with machinery, and that was the reaper. If you know your history of the reaper and the thrasher and the seeder were the three machines that were coming in. Some of them were even steam powered back then. Woo! But McCormick was the big company at that time. I know a lot about because I worked at that actual factory. I worked in a factory in Cleveland. That was the plow company, and it was called the Plow. And we had those remnants. We had those big poles where the donkeys would pull with the big, you put on the donkey and it would pull the belts, and the belts in the attic would move, and you had drills, and you had the benders, and you had the oak presses, and you had the big steamers, and we still use the steamers from the late 1800s and 1900s there. They heat the place. That's what I ran as a maintenance man there. I kept them going. They were very good still. We had an air compressor from an Ingersoll Rand, one of the original 1923 air compressors there, and I would fix it up and shine it up because I was so proud of that thing. And when you look back in time, and you can go upstairs and you can look back in time, and you can almost feel the pain of those men in this hot shop upstairs where the furnaces were burning downstairs, and they're feeding these hot metal up to you, and you're putting it in this machine, and it was just and it looks like the 1800s with these belts. The belts were still there, and the drill presses that ran on the belts from the donkey power were still there. So the three relics of that are two relics. I used to believe there was three relics, but they say there was only two relics of barbarism, was slavery and polygamy, and we don't look at that polygamy aspect. And how what we have now and what we have in the gender dynamics wars now is just relics of bad politics and bad decisions that were made back there, and it's taken 100 years and it's been 60 years now since that war, and it's we still have them. Everybody was happy with it up to the 60s. Everybody was happy with it, but something happened. What happened? Well, the women they didn't want to fancy to that monogamy anymore. They weren't going to do that. They wanted sexual expression, and we still had to settle. Yeah, marriage has got to go. Yeah, and that's the point today. Though the forced marriage onto men is and I think the Mormons and all were right about that. I don't know about their forced marriage and polygamous marriage and everything. I just believe that the government should get out of our business. They got all up in this, all up in our business crawls when they came into our bedrooms in the Civil War, and we haven't been able to get them out of our bedrooms. We haven't been able to get them out of our personal life. They tax you, and there's divorce courts, and there's still slavery for men, and there's still debtor's prison for men. Like I said, when you look at the two tenants there, they just switched places. All men took the place of the slaves. Now we're equality in that thing means that you're all going to do the work, and then we're going to have this totalitarian classism of the robber barons at the time that ruled. and they were the ones that were going to make sure you did your work and you weren't polygamous, and you were following all the rules of your church, which they would say your church should be this. And our Constitution died that day, I suppose. Our Constitution died because we didn't pay attention. We didn't nurture it. Everybody has the right to their own. Everybody has the right to their own religion, to think about those things. Yeah, our equality is a diminished equality. Traveler's Cave, we get a diminished equality. We all get to work that slave labor. However, we, as the proletariat, delegate it to each other. They'll kind of let us do our own thing, and on that, and even that, there's a second classism that came in the middle class, which will delegate it to the poor or the sub middle class, and the sub middle class want to delegate it way down to the illegal immigrants, the legal immigrants that are coming in to work the farms, and nobody wants to do those jobs, but somebody still has to do them. That's why I'm a Maoist. I believe everybody should work 6 years, 8 years on the farm, whatever it takes to get it done. And then we all share that duty and we all eat. But that's how you split up that thing. And then you don't argue about it. However, that duty falls to you, whether you work in a grocery store, whether you pack bags, or you run it, or you stock those shelves, or you move boxes into a truck, or you drive the truck, or you work in a warehouse and you move boxes in a warehouse, and you work on a farm, or you actually plant and plow and seed, and however you end up doing that, and what for that process of agriculture, everybody should have to split that duty because we all eat. But that's neither here nor there. But in slavery, you can see how polygamy and monogamy became the thing that they would use to get that slavery. As I say, that 20 to 30% of every society ever been and ever is going to be needs 10 to 30% slaves. I'm 100%. We all need, every society that's ever been, I worded that wrong, sorry. every society that's ever been on this planet needs 20 to 30% slaves, and them are the people that are going to do the work. Them are the people, you can name the work whatever you want to call it, working at McDonald's. but but it has to do with agriculture and who's going to do the work, and that's unless it's totally automated and machines do it, which ain't going to happen. Somebody's going to have to do that work, and there would be a segment of society that has to do that work. So name it by any other name. A turd is still a turd, even if you call it a rose. It still smells like a turd. So we had this polygamy thing that came in, and they switched us and they baited us, and they made it into every man will volunteer for that under the disguise of monogamy, and then you get a wife, and you get and she'll be true to you, and then you be true to her, and then you have this traditional relationships, and that doesn't violate honor codes too. That's what this was about, honor codes. Because the men were all like, "Who? I mean, all them." They do it nowadays, even with the mention of women being, polyandry. With the mention of polyandry, you will see a traditional conservative man's hair turn into Don King, and he'll be like, let's fight. Women shouldn't do that, they're saying. And I'm saying it's none of our business. It's none of our business what they do, and it's none of their business what we do. And that includes your wallet. That includes your finances. You're not the father. That's what I say. But we still have these relics of barbarism in our society that resemble the same thing they resembled back then. And we never really answered the question, who were the slaves going to be? They were just going to be the working men that got divorces, or the incels, or the TFLers that didn't have wives. They would do the work because there has to be this exalted class. In Christianity, there always has to be an exalted class that's more moral than the rest. So it's coming out in the wash today in the form of postmodernism, and we're asking questions about these things, but it's shh, don't talk about them things in the bedroom. Don't talk about that. It's all monogamous. We're all still working under these Christian laws that have been heaved upon us. And we'll tell the lies still. And that's what Mgtow comes in to say, you guys lied to us. You led me down a trap. You led me down to the trap, and then you sprung the track, and you said, you fell for it. And I said, yeah, you got me good. Now I'm a slave. Yeah, you're a slave, sucker. Yeah, you're a slave, sucker. And that's what happened in my relationship. And that happened to a lot of you guys in your relationships too. You fell in that trap, and they were like, ha, sucker. Well, that started in the Civil War. That started under the polygamy rules, and the Kansas bleeding and all that stuff. And Kansas is bleeding because we didn't settle it back then. And it took, if you can even, just observe what happened in the 1960s. We still had to have a civil rights movement. And in that civil rights movement popped up the real feminism, not that fake sort of feminism that was back in Mary Wollstonecraft's day, or the turn of the century sort of fake feminism and everything. The real feminism reared its ugly head and says, we no longer want to live under these rules of monogamy. And every traditionalite, every conservative, his hair just went, no, you got to. Which is absurdity, because you know what they told me at the time of my divorce: you're no longer a father with a stroke of a pen. And I said, well, if a stroke of a pen can remove my fatherhood, it must not have been real to begin with. But there are arguments that we'll have in the future. And the Economist, he says that polygamy always leads to civil war. He was stating Chad, and the country of Chad, not Chad the not Chad the TFL nightmare, but the country of Chad, and he was stating from another view, and I think it's pretty much I think it's pretty not much on a false equivocation is was equivalent of he said this will happen if this will happen, and that's that's ridiculous. That's a fallacy when you say things like that. We can learn from our history, and history is a very good thing to learn from. And our history in America with the Civil War up to now, when we get involved with people's sexuality and marriage and that stuff, is horrible. We will have great wars over those things, and we'll have great wars enforcing those things on other countries. But it's going to need to be settled again, and that's what we're seeing now, the uptake of no more marriage. Men don't want to put up with that. Men don't want to be slaves anymore. We want freedom. We want equality. And I'll do my time on the farm. I'll do my time in the work camps, but let it be equal time. I'll do 8 years. You guys do 8 years. The president of the United States, all those rich state senators and those people in the House, they can all do those 8 years too, which none of them have really ever did. They've never done their 8 years on the farm to feed people. They just think that everything free comes to the grocery store, and little fairies, little brownies go in there at night, and they beep, 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 happy little brownies stocking the goods. And that's where they think that comes from. Jackasses. Or at least they don't want to consider the possibility that them people are being treated like slaves. And those are the same people that feed you. But that was the argument in the 1850s through the 1860s in the Civil War and everything. Who was going to be the meat machine? Who was going to be the human slaver, the human meat machines? We thought we had settled that, but we really didn't. There was some awful politics that was done, and the GOP had a lot to do with that. And what they did is they replaced it with traditionalism of monogamy, and within the chosen religion, which was the Church of Christ. Believing in some magic helper that's going to magically help you, and he's your magic buddy, that shows up. He's your invisible friend that shows up and delegates moral conditions to you. Jesus. So I just always wanted to talk about this because there seems to be a disconnect sometimes, and there seems to be a disconnect with where this thing actually started and everything. United States and the West, what they would say Western culture, I hate that term, that started in the Civil War, and it was a trade-off. We made a deal with the devil at that point, and the devil was those Christians, and they were those Lutherans and those Baptists and those Protestants, those Catholics, and those what's the other one? I can't remember all of them. That was the devil we made the deal with, because we handed them the Mormons, and we violated our very rules that we were supposed to adhere to. You have a right to pick your own religion or believe in your own religion, and you have a right, like me, not to have to believe that. You have both those rights. If you read it, you'll see you have both those rights, and the freedom of speech, and you have the freedom to articulate these things, and you have the freedom to do this on YouTube, but all those things get violated too as soon as men start talking about they want to end this deal with this awful barbaric deal with Jesus and monogamy. It's not a deal that works out very well for me or you. It just leaves me and you as a slave. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Usually I'll shut it off, and I will shut it off right about now because I like these things to be palatable and easy to listen to. And that's about it. And like always, each and one of you guys, thanks for showing up and thanks for listening. If you're going to listen on this future of this podcast, tomorrow or the next day or the next, thanks for that. Thank you, men, for listening. And like always, Mgtow's gonna bring up some awful questions, some realistic observations that will be unfriendly to the conservative types, the traditional, the trad cons. They're not gonna like what we say, and their hair is gonna pop out like Don King when you say it to them, and they're gonna get all, "Ew, we want to fight." Those barbarians, that's what they do. And they never want to discuss things, rationally like men. They want to just slap and punch and spit like little girls. We have a tough job to do here, and we'll keep doing it until they understand. But if you're ever questioned about how this thing did get started, you just have to look at the twin relics of barbarism and ask yourself what happened there and what deals were made with the devil and how that transcended into the 20th century. And with that, thanks a lot for coming around, man. And most of all, thanks a lot for being Mgtow. Mgtow.